You're listening to Leading Up with Udemy. This podcast is your guide to developing your skills as an emerging or seasoned leader. I'm Alan Todd, your host and the Vice President of Leadership Development at Udemy. Together, we can work, lead, and live differently to create a better world. I was excited to have Brandon Carson from Starbucks on the podcast today. I really loved how Brandon talked about the power of a great coach and how they inspire people and connect them to the organization, to the team, and connect them to the purpose of the company.
Leaders should help unlock potential in others, and they should be talent developers when they're at their best. And the way we do that is within ourselves. I can't make someone perform better, but I can guide them and be there to lift them up, help remove barriers, encourage them to keep moving forward.
This week, I'm speaking with Brandon Carson, the VP of Learning, Leadership, and Cultural Experiences at Starbucks, where he is enabling the success of 450,000 employee partners. He's led talent development at some of the largest and most profitable companies in the country like Walmart, Delta Airlines, Home Depot, and more. Brandon is a pioneer in helping organizations to build critical skills faster. His book, Learning in the Age of Immediacy, lays out the framework for adapting to automation and building skills faster, while his book, L&D's Playbook for the Digital Age, teaches how to more tightly integrate learning with business strategy. Brandon founded the nonprofit L&D Cares to provide no-cost mentoring, coaching, and other resources to anyone who cares about building a better workplace experience. Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, super. So, Brandon, you've had a trailblazing career with bigger roles and bigger companies, seemingly nonstop. So how did that all come about?
Well, I've been doing this for 20 plus years now, Alan, and it was all an accident. So I was a textbook designer, primarily focused on designing higher education books. And at one point, this was in the late 90s, we wanted to provide an interactive CD-ROM supplement to our flagship biology textbook. We hadn't allocated budget for the design and development of it, so me and another colleague took it on. And this is where I learned instructional design. And then as we finished the project, the company moved design offshore and laid off the entire team. So I was spun out on my own. It was the late 90s in Silicon Valley. So there was this little thing called the internet that was happening.
Yeah.
And so I started working for tech companies, and they were interested in leveraging the internet as their new training platform. So I consulted with many different tech companies, including Apple, Microsoft, Yahoo, and others, developing all types of training for employees and customers. I did that for about 10 years and then transitioned into retail, where I joined Home Depot. I led store associate training, and my team transformed how they delivered in-store training by making it all mobile and what we called in-aisle learning. I then moved to Delta Airlines, where I led training for their global airport operations and stayed through COVID. I then joined Walmart, where I led talent management for the US business, led their leadership development practice, and led their education benefit program. And then just last year, I moved to Seattle to join Starbucks, leading our learning and development team. So my path has been a little unconventional. It's not one I chose, but it's one that I've consistently been in love with since I realized that my entire job is based on building capability in others. And knowing that the work my teams do is all about transferring knowledge to people and helping them be more confident in the work they do is challenging, but it's a gift, and it's one that I will always cherish.
Beautiful. So I want to get into more detail about how you develop leaders and all that kind of stuff. But before, I'm curious, for our listeners, how do you pick a company or an industry to go work in? How should they think about that?
Well, each company I've been at is unique in their own way, from the way they're structured to how they view customers, their workforce, the role technology plays in the organization, how decisions are made, and so on. So no two companies are exactly alike, but a key differentiator for companies is whether they have what I call a culture of learning. And by that, I mean, do they value the growth and development of their workforce? Do they invest in their people? And this isn't about the company culture itself. It's about whether the company sees itself as a learning company. Does it foster innovation, curiosity, and what I refer to as scalable learning, which is a focus on how the organization can learn faster at scale, which in the age of AI is an imperative. So when a company is not a culture of learning, a transactional approach to training just for the job role is the norm. But as it applies to the broader company culture, I'm a strong believer in the profound impact culture has across the workforce. I've survived challenging ones and I've thrived in great ones. Your company culture impacts every aspect of the company and its performance. It must be nurtured, protected, and carried by everyone at the company. It is the leading indicator of employee engagement, productivity, and the overall success of the organization. But company culture is also a funny thing. It's often hard to outwardly describe, but very noticeable when it breaks down. So the old saying goes that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And throughout my career, I've seen it and lived it. And leaders have a special responsibility to be stewards of the culture, add to it, and also advance it and make their decisions based on the company's values.
Yeah. So let's say you don't have a C-suite title and you don't even have a team to manage. How can you be a good steward of company culture?
Yeah, it's a good question, Alan. I believe leaders have an amplified role to play in carrying the culture, but the company culture is just not in the purview of the leaders. Culture is created and maintained by the behaviors, attitudes, and actions of all employees. Culture comes alive when all employees celebrate the successes of others, or when they listen and support each other in failure, when they actively participate in company events and initiatives, and when employees recognize when culture change is needed, they advocate for that change. So, like I said, it's important for leaders to be stewards and to carry the culture, but it's a responsibility of everyone to advance the culture.
Yeah, so let's move on. One of the manifestations of culture and leadership is employee engagement. And what I see right now is all over the world, employee engagement scores are going down. Stress at work, the report of stressful incidents at work is going up. Baby boomers are retiring. Gen Z this year is said to surpass them in numbers in the workplace. So there's a lot of turbulence. We didn't get to Gen AI. I'll save that for later. But there's never been a more critical need for great leaders. And I'd like to get your thoughts. You've been developing leaders at large companies, great places, very well-led organizations. What have you learned about developing leaders?
No, it's a great question, and you're right. It's coming out of COVID. We're in a pandemic of anxiety in many ways now because of just the challenges of everything going on in the world, right? Not only just at work. So the principles that matter to me and that I really try to foster in leaders that I develop and that our team develops is really around trust, transparency, and autonomy. I believe those principles foster a sense of belonging on teams, which right now is probably more critical than at any other point in time, frankly, coming out of not just the pandemic that we had, but you conflate that with the tech tsunami we've been under for the last 2 decades and this really exponential advancement of everything going on around us, this fire hose of information, and just to absorb that complexity and the complications that come from that. So these principles of trust, transparency, and autonomy are foundational in a lot of ways to simply being human in this complex world of work. But add to that purpose. So purpose is also a key leadership principle. And purpose at work goes deeper and will outlast the product or service you're creating or selling or business goal you're striving to achieve. Purpose is the why you do what you do. And as a leader, I see it as critical to what I do to help those on my team find meaning and purpose in their work. And it's not always possible, but it's something that people want to feel about the work they do. And I think a lot of that realization or that elevation of meaning and purpose in the work is coming out of the era we're in right now, in the times we're in. And so I find those things to be most likely for a leader to be able to create a condition of psychological safety on their team, which is really important for a high-performing team to be able to come together and deliver on what they need to deliver on.
Yeah, you're reminding me, we did study with Dave Ulrich at University of Michigan and a group of leaders for the conference board that I spent a good part of a year on. And belonging and trust and emotional intelligence were things that were lacking. And it's funny, I was talking to someone earlier today, an organization, and they said, we've been forced to go hybrid, and we know that that's the world. And we still have this culture where you get right to the agenda on the meeting. We don't try to say like, Brandon, how you doing? How's it going? Like, let's just check in. And that's part of what we found in the work with Ulrich and Company. It's all the things that you described, is making sure that checking in with people. Do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel safe enough to dare, as Abraham Maslow would say? Are they feeling connected to each other, and are they connected to the purpose of the organization? So I love what you're saying, because it connects so deeply with not just my lived experience, but the research as well.
Yeah, I'll quickly add, because that's a great story. And I know, Dave, one of the first experiences I had at Starbucks when I joined was what we call immersions. And so we go through this process of immersing new partners into the experience of becoming a Starbucks partner. And, candidly, when I come to work, I always think about work, usually first. I'm thinking about the work. And I remember one of my first immersions, I sat down with this person who I was going to start talking to. And I started talking about my work and the work I've been doing. And she paused me. She's like, no. This is our first meeting together, our first immersion. I want to get to know you as a human being. I don't want to know about your work. Let's talk about who you are. I'll share who I am, and then we'll go from there. And I was like, wow, that is so refreshing. And so we have these experiences where the Starbucks culture comes to life in that regard, because it's not first about what you do. It's first about who you are. And I can imagine a cross for people, right? Like you're just saying, amplifying the humanity in the work and the human connection that's important, because at the end of the day, that matters most. And through those connections and relationships is how the work gets done anyway.
Yeah, I want to just go back for a second to the leadership skills: trust, transparency, and autonomy. So a lot of studies showed when people went to virtual work or hybrid work, it really exposed a raw nerve where people didn't have autonomy, and they felt that their manager didn't trust them to get the work done if they couldn't see them. And I'm wondering how do you reconcile that, or how do we close that gap or change people's mindsets as leaders to buy into trust and transparency and autonomy?
Yeah, 100%. Well, leadership is a skill, and people are not born leaders. It's a craft that is learned. And as unique as each of us are, we each have our own leadership style. And I remember, this was years ago, I saw this quote from John Wooden, who was the head basketball coach at UCLA. Now, I'm not usually a sporty person, but I saw this quote from him, and he was a top coach for many years. He coached Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Walton, many others. He's the only coach to win 12 NCAA championships. So he's a master in his game, if you will. But I saw this quote, and he said, be more concerned with your character than your reputation. Your character is what you really are, while your reputation is merely what others think you are. And I love that quote, because in essence, it says that our worth is determined by our values and actions rather than the accolades we may receive. And so by focusing on character, we anchor who we are based on our beliefs and not what others think of us. And I think that in the pantheon of leadership and leadership styles, the best leaders I've ever had were those leaders that came to me as a coach. And one of the things that the hallmarks of my leadership style, or what I like to think about when I think about leader as coach, I want to be more collaborative and less directive. Because to your point on autonomy, if I have a manager that's just telling me what to go do, then and being directive to me, that doesn't really help me grow and develop. And And the worst leaders I've ever had are those ones that are micromanagers. They really get down in your stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that goes to autonomy. So I want to be more collaborative, less directive. I want to give autonomy and do less hand holding. I want to realize that growth for the individual that reports to me is growth for not only them, but it's also growth for me. I want to try to lead people to mastery and depth. I want to encourage them to work smarter, not harder. And I really value and see coaching as how I create value for the team.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Brandon. So we're going to move on to an area I think that is right down your alley because you're the curious explorer who's discovering and pioneering the future of learning and how we learn in organizations. Google CEO Sundar Pichai, he said, AI is one of the most profound things we're working on, more profound than fire or electricity. Goldman Sachs says it's going to add 7 trillion to the global GDP. PwC upped that, did some more analysis. They say, no, it's going to be 15 trillion. But what I've heard you say is like, hey, this is more than a technology. So tell me, what is it that you see right now from the perspective of someone who thinks about learning and leadership and culture?
I definitely see AI as a wholesale transformation and not just a technology. Yes, it will change every aspect of how we work, how we connect at work, and how we extract purpose and meaning from work. I tend to see exponential changes and advancements such as AI through the prism of impact. Its impact, like you just said, has the potential to be more significant than fire or electricity. So that means it changes our lives more than just our work. So if you go back, and this is an example I used last week when I was in London at a conference, if you go back to the 1440s and you look at the Gutenberg press, for example, printing ushered in broad and significant change for humanity. Sure, it was a machine that actually leveraged many other inventions to bring itself to life, such as movable type, ink, paper, etc. But collectively, the Gutenberg press brought mass education and literacy, a singular transformation that impacted humanity. And that's the comparison I like to use with AI. It has the potential to be this era's Gutenberg press. We're already seeing it change jobs, and not just the physical jobs that focus on rote tasks and routine work. It will also change what I refer to as the cognitive work that is non-routine and focuses on more complex tasks. The next 5 years will be more transformational than the last 50 when it comes to unleashing productivity across the work with Gen AI and AI in general. The challenge, though, is how companies will see the intersection of both artificial intelligence and human intelligence and highlight the intersection of both of those. That's why those of us in HR and L&D need to be central to the implementation of AI in the workplace. This is the moment in time where the humanity of the work needs to be amplified and highlighted, because people are not the most important asset of a company. I don't like to refer to humans as assets. People are not property. But in this age, our job is not to make humans better at work, but to make work better for humans. So how we implement AI should be in service to elevating the human experience and ensuring that we preserve what is uniquely human, our creativity, our unpredictability, our adaptability, our need to connect to each other. So most work, as we know in the future, will be done in teams. So human connection is the most critical aspect of the future of work. So I like to think of it as we will be tech-enabled, yes, but we are at the inflection point of being tech-enabled and people-led, or the inverse, which is too dystopian to really imagine. So that's why I think every company should have their people practice in the conversation with how AI is implemented across the organization, and not just let the tech group or the IT function lead that conversation.
Yeah, I like that. And one of the things I heard you say before is that with Gen AI, with the rise of that human intelligence will soar in importance. And I suspect that will bring a renaissance or rebirth to the human styled leadership. So how are you thinking about that in terms of changing? You're in charge of thinking about workplace experience. How's that going to change in your mind?
The watchouts for me really are around that positioning the work itself and the meaning of work and the architectures that we have around work. I mean, kind of our current operating model in the world of work, when you think about it, it's kind of a manufacturing age model where the main tenets of work are built around efficiency and productivity. And right now, you're seeing a lot of company leaders realize, wait a minute, AI can really drive productivity and increase efficiency. And that's great because through that, it will surface to the top what brings more of the humanity in the work. Like, how can we redirect the work away from those routine or rote tasks, right? So that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't want to assertively go after evolving from scalable efficiency without moving to what Hegel calls scalable learning. And so at the same time that we're changing the entire operating model of work through technologies and transformations, we need to factor in how do we build the motivation to learn into the physical and digital work systems, because we're going to need to be continuously learning. We're going to need to foster a culture of learning in every organization. And that means amplifying the human component and discovering new ways of working for people as a good part of their routine tasks and more rote work is taken away from them.
What would be your advice to someone early in their career right now that either is a first-time leader or they aspire to leadership? What should they do with regards to Gen AI and the future of work and this human intelligence? How should they start thinking, studying, or what skills should they be building?
I think for me, the watchouts are around safety, ethics, these types of things, right? So work is going to be redefined in many ways. We may not get the comfort and leisure of a lot of time as the technology and the transformation that it brings moves so fast. I mean, if you think back, the telephone took 80 years to become ubiquitous. We connected 2/3 of the world to the internet in under 40 years. It took 6 months to sell 1 million Palm Pilots. I had one.
Yeah, I did too.
And it took 24 hours to sell 1 million iPhones. And as we saw with ChatGPT, it took 3 months to bring 100 million users onto that platform. So there's been this sort of exponential advance of how we leverage new technologies and how we want to integrate them into the work we do. And we're in a little bit of the hype cycle and trying to figure out kind of how this all fits together. So I think for new leaders, it's really more about understanding kind of the humanity of leadership. When I talk about the coach model, connecting to people, the strength of how you nurture human connection, that's key to how Starbucks looks at everything we do when it comes to the work and what we amplify in the way we work. It's all about first making that connection to each other. And then, like I said earlier, tech-enabled, but people-led. And so I think for new leaders coming into the practice, it doesn't mean that the core of being human has really changed. It's like you just need to amplify that even more.
I like that. So one topic we have studied, we surveyed 3,000 people in January of 2024. It was all about just leadership in Gen AI. The biggest shock to me was 79% of respondents don't feel good about their job and the future with regards to Gen AI. So that was the shock. And there are lots of studies. There are bulls and bears, optimists and pessimists in this world. But I worry right now, my biggest fear is that's just too many people to be running around worried. And that can't be good for society. It can't be good for companies. So I'd love to, get your thoughts on that.
No, it's a great point. And there's lots of studies coming out sort of in real time in a lot of ways. I saw one where the focus on feedback. So the participants in this study were okay receiving positive feedback from AI, an AI coach. But when it was negative feedback, they didn't want that from an AI coach. They wanted that from a human coach. And so I think the complexities of being human will always be there. The watch-outs for me really are just around safety and ethical concerns. I think that this is the time, it's probably a little late, but this is a time for HR to establish some governance mechanisms around AI and its usage. Our challenge right now is we have a lack of government intervention in regulating AI, and we're basically leaving it to the tech companies that are creating it to make it safe for us. And at best, that's challenging, especially when a lot of tech companies are really advertising companies and they're developing the next iterations of AI.
Sounds like a horrible idea, by the way. And I'm not making that a political statement, and I'm not casting aspersion on tech companies. That's just why you don't have the fox watch the hen house.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay? Bad things will happen.
Yeah, profit's their core driver,
Yeah.
And so I'm calling HR to action, and I've been talking to some HR bodies and some HR colleagues about this to consider an alternative path, one that recognizes the power of the transformation occurring and also is able to bring forward an operating model that ensures the humanity of transformation is the key driver of change. So we must all be in this conversation, and we must be inclusive so that we don't unleash technology that segments or polarizes people. This transformation is at the scale and size of the internet itself, or to your quote from Sundar about electricity and fire. But technology itself is inherently neutral, but humans are not. We are the ones that decide how to use technology as it transforms our world and us. So we must have a broader conversation on AI than just the tech companies driving it. And there's no really better body than those of us in HR and L&D to engage in this conversation at a level where we can call action to ensure that what we bring forward in the world, what we allow to bring forward in the world, is human-centered and human-focused.
I like the depth of the way you're thinking about this in terms of particularly safety and ethics and this human approach. I wonder if you think in a world that's changing so fast, do you believe that leaders, and I suppose in particular senior leaders, will slow down and take time and be thoughtful? And I mean this, sort of as a global question, because it requires us to slow down our thinking, and people are going fast. And when they go fast, and I've heard you quote Daniel Kahneman before, they're apt to make bad, fast decisions instead of slow, thoughtful, deep, reflective, collaborative decisions. So my worry would be that things go fast, and is for the same reason I don't have time to learn. I don't have time to waste. We're making the decision, and we could be buying a shiny solution without a problem.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I am an optimist, and I am a rationalist when it comes to AI, but I'm an optimist when it comes to humanity. I think examples are like climate change. I think sometimes we're slow to the moment and we're slow to engage, but once humans engage, then we figure things out. And I do think that we're in an okay place to where we're figuring out and having conversations and having discussions, and some rational and some not so rational, but that's okay because innovation is messy and creativity is messy. Ideologies are messy. The true function of ideology is to hide the truth. And so being curious and assertive and relentless will help us get to the truth we need. And I think that happens over time. So I'm an optimist that we will figure this out and it will be better for humanity in general.
Yeah, I think that's a great ending point and a great vision for how we should think about the future of AI. So as we wrap up here, Brandon, I have a question I ask everybody that we get on the show, and that is, what are you curious about and learning now?
Well, what I'm curious about right now is Shakespeare. And I just went over to London and saw the Globe Theatre. I saw Ian McKellen in a play, saw the master at work. And then Judi Dench has just come out. She's one of my favorite actresses. She's just come out with a book called Shakespeare Pays the Rent. And it's a journey through her career and her life with Shakespeare. That's my sort of down the rabbit hole fascination right now. I don't know if it's appropriate for this audience, but it's really an exciting topic to dig into for me. So.
I think it's beautiful to hear. You are definitely the first person that has ever answered with Shakespeare. So
and maybe the last, right?
I love it. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Alan. Had a great time.
Thanks again to Brandon Carson for joining me today on the podcast. Follow Leading Up, a podcast from Udemy Business, wherever you find your podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode to help you level up your leadership skills. Follow the show so you never miss a new episode. And if you like the show, leave a rating or a review. We love the feedback, and it really helps us to find new listeners. To learn more about Leading Up or how Udemy can help you develop leaders at scale and move business forward, visit business.udemy.com. The Leading Up podcast is produced in partnership with Pod People. Our original theme is by Soundboard.